Hey folks, before the video starts, please leave a like and subscribe to cheer me up. Make sure you are relaxed and enjoy today's stories. I stumbled upon a dark web cult. They're trying to recruit me. So, yeah, I did something stupid, and I know how it sounds, but before you judge me, let me tell you, I wasn't looking for trouble. It was one of those boring Friday nights where Netflix just isn't cutting it, and the internet rabbit hole is a little too tempting to resist. You ever been there? Where you start on YouTube watching funny cat videos, and before you know it, you're knee-deep in conspiracy theories about lizard people running the government. Yeah, that kind of night. I've always heard people talk about the deep web, how it's full of weird stuff you're not supposed to see. Most of it sounded like urban legends, just exaggerated stories to freak out gullible people. But curiosity got the best of me. I wasn't planning on doing anything illegal, just poking around, just to see what was out there. So I downloaded Tor. For those of you who don't know, Tor is this browser that lets you access the deep web. It's supposed to make you anonymous, or whatever. I thought I was being careful. I had my VPN on, and I was ready to explore some hidden corners of the internet. At first, it was boring. Honestly, most of the deep web is just old forums and weird chat rooms. A lot of it is just marketplaces selling stuff you don't even want to think about. I was about to call it quits when I stumbled upon this link. It wasn't like the others, no weird gibberish or anything. It just said, "The Enlightened Ones," followed by some numbers that didn't make much sense. I was intrigued. I mean, the name sounded like one of those pretentious groups that think they have all the answers to life's big questions. I thought it might be good for a laugh, so I clicked on it. The site was nothing like what I expected. It was plain, almost like it was from the early days of the internet. Black background, white text, no images, no flashy graphics. Just a single paragraph in the center of the screen that read, "Welcome, Seeker. You have taken the first step toward enlightenment. The path is dark, but we will guide you. Submit your email to begin your journey." Okay, so I know what you're thinking. Red flags everywhere, right? And you'd be right, but there was something about it that felt different. It wasn't trying to sell me anything, and it wasn't asking for money. It was just an email, and I figured, what the hell? I could always ignore them later if they got spammy. So I put in a throwaway email address and hit submit. Almost instantly, I got a reply. It was a single line of text. "You have been chosen. You will hear from us soon." I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured it was probably some automated response, something to keep people hooked. But then, the emails started coming. At first, they were harmless, just strange, cryptic messages that didn't make much sense. Things like, "The night is darkest before the dawn," or "The shadows speak to those who listen." Weird, but not particularly scary. I figured it was just some role-playing game, or ARG, that I'd accidentally stumbled into. But then, things started getting personal. One night, I got an email that made my blood run cold. It was a picture of my house. I'm not talking about some random image pulled from Google Earth or anything. No, this was a recent photo taken from the street at night. My house, with my car in the driveway and my bedroom light on. The caption underneath read, "We see you." I remember just staring at my screen, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe it was just a stock image that looked like my house. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. It was my house. Someone had been outside, in the dark, watching. That's when I started to panic. I deleted the email, shut down my computer, and double-checked that all the doors were locked. I tried to convince myself that it was just a prank, someone messing with me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The next day, I didn't check my email. I was too freaked out. But by the time night rolled around, curiosity got the best of me. I logged back in, half expecting another picture or some new creepy message, but there was nothing. No emails, no notifications, just silence. For a moment, I thought maybe it was over. Maybe they'd gotten bored or moved on to someone else. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. And I was right, because that's when the phone call started. The first call came at 2:37 a.m. I remember the exact time because I jolted awake and squinted at my phone, the harsh glow cutting through the darkness of my room. I didn't recognize the number. It wasn't even from my area code. Half asleep and more annoyed than anything, I let it go to voicemail. No way was I dealing with spam calls in the middle of the night. But then it rang again. Same number. Now, I was awake. The kind of awake that doesn't go away easily. My heart was beating a little faster, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was connected to those emails. Still, I ignored it, hoping whoever it was would just give up. It stopped ringing. I lay there in the silence, trying to calm myself down. I almost drifted back to sleep when the phone rang again. This time immediately after the last call ended. It was like they knew I was ignoring them, and they were determined to get through. I picked up the phone, ready to tell whoever it was to screw off. But when I answered, no one was there. Just silence. I said hello a few times, but there was no response. Just this eerie, oppressive silence that seemed to stretch on forever. I was about to hang up when I heard it. Breathing. Slow, deliberate, like someone was right there on the other end, waiting for me to speak. It wasn't normal breathing though. It was raspy, labored, like whoever it was struggled with every breath. And then, just as I was about to hang up, a voice broke through the silence. "We're coming for you." That's all they said. 4 words, barely a whisper, but enough to send a jolt of fear down my spine. I slammed the phone down, my hands shaking. I wanted to believe it was just some kind of sick joke, but something about that voice felt too real, too raw. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind outside had me jumping out of my skin. I kept checking the locks on my doors, peering out the windows, half expecting to see someone standing there, watching. But the street was empty, just as it should be at that hour. By morning, I convinced myself I was overreacting. I was just tired, maybe even paranoid after those emails. I went about my day like normal, trying to ignore the knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that someone was watching me. I decided not to tell anyone. I mean, what was I supposed to say? Hey, I was messing around on the dark web, and now I'm getting creepy phone calls. People would either think I was insane, or that I deserved it for being stupid enough to go there in the first place. That night, the phone rang again. Same number. I didn't even hesitate this time. I answered it, determined to confront whoever was on the other end. But again, there was no voice. Just that same silence, stretching on, with that same heavy breathing in the background. I waited, my heart pounding in my chest, for the voice to speak again. This time, it was different. They didn't whisper threats or make ominous statements. Instead, They just started laughing. It was soft at first, almost like they were holding it back, but then it grew louder, more hysterical. It wasn't the kind of laugh that comes from something funny. It was the kind that belongs to someone who's completely lost their mind. It went on and on, this unhinged laughter, until I couldn't take it anymore and hung up. I tried to block the number, but no matter what I did, they kept calling. Every night, without fail, at the same time. I stopped sleeping altogether. The calls were bad enough, but it was the sense of being watched that really got to me. I started noticing things, small things, but enough to keep me on edge, like the way the porch light would flicker, even though the bulb was new, or the strange shadows that seemed to move just out of the corner of my eye. And then there were the emails. They started up again, this time with even less sense than before. Cryptic phrases like, "The time is near," or "You cannot escape." Some were just random strings of numbers and letters, almost like code, but nothing I could decipher. I deleted them as fast as they came in, but they kept showing up, always from different addresses, always saying the same things. One night, after another round of calls and emails, I decided to leave the house. I just couldn't take it anymore. I drove around aimlessly for hours, trying to clear my head, trying to escape this growing sense of dread. But no matter where I went, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. It was like there was this constant presence, just out of sight, watching my every move. I'd catch glimpses of cars behind me, the same ones over and over again, even when I changed directions. I'd pull into a parking lot, and they'd drive past, only to show up again a few blocks later. When I finally went home, exhausted and on the edge of a breakdown, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw it. Another car parked down the street, far enough away to not raise suspicion, but close enough to keep an eye on me. The headlights flicked on as soon as I noticed it, and it slowly drove away, disappearing into the night. But not before I caught a glimpse of the driver's face, just for a second. A pale, gaunt face, with eyes that seemed to burn with an unnatural intensity, and I knew deep down that this was far from over. They weren't just watching me anymore. They were waiting, and whatever they were planning, it was coming soon. I didn't leave my house for the next few days. After seeing that car, that face, I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. I tried to go about my life pretending everything was normal, but the anxiety gnawed at me constantly. Every knock on the door, every unexpected noise sent me into a panic. I was a wreck. The phone calls kept coming, but I'd stopped answering them. The laughter, the breathing, it was too much. I felt like I was losing my mind, and I didn't know what to do. Talking to the police seemed pointless. What was I supposed to tell them? That some anonymous creep from the deep web was messing with me? That I was being followed by a car whose driver I couldn't describe? I could already imagine the blank stares and the polite dismissal. Then one morning, I found something on my front porch that made my blood run cold. It was a black envelope, sealed with what looked like red wax, placed right on my doormat. There was no name, no address, just a smooth, matte black envelope, almost like it had been placed there by hand. My first instinct was to leave it alone, pretend I hadn't seen it. But the curiosity got the best of me. I mean, this had to be connected to everything that had been happening, right? My hands were shaking as I picked it up and turned it over. The wax seal was a strange symbol, something I didn't recognize. two intersecting circles with a small triangle in the center. It looked almost ancient, like something you'd see in a history book. I stood there on the porch for what felt like forever, just staring at it. Part of me didn't want to know what was inside, but I knew I couldn't ignore it. I took a deep breath, broke the seal, and slid out a single sheet of paper. It wasn't handwritten, but printed in the same white font as the website I'd found that first night. The message was short, but it felt like a punch to the gut. You have been chosen. We are closer than you think. Your initiation begins soon. I dropped the paper like it was on fire. My heart was pounding, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. They were here. They'd been to my house. They were watching me so closely that they knew exactly where I was, where I lived, and they wanted me to know it. Panic set in. I rushed inside, locking the door behind me, checking all the windows to make sure they were secured. But no matter how much I tried to calm myself down, the fear kept growing. They weren't just playing games anymore. They were escalating, and I had no idea how to stop it. I didn't leave the house for the rest of the day. I just sat there, in the living room, clutching my phone like it was a lifeline. I thought about calling someone, anyone, but who would believe me? And even if they did, what could they do? I was in over my head, and I knew it. As the day wore on, the sun started to set, casting long shadows across the room. I'd closed all the curtains, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was outside, watching, waiting. I kept replaying that note in my head. Your initiation begins soon. What did that even mean? By the time night fell, I was a nervous wreck. Every noise, every creak of the house sent me into a frenzy. I kept pacing back and forth, trying to think of what to do next. And then, just as I was starting to convince myself that I was overreacting, the lights went out. It wasn't just a power outage. It was like someone had cut the power to the entire house. The sudden darkness was suffocating, and for a moment, I was frozen in place. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. A new message. My hands were trembling as I unlocked the screen. It was an email from one of those cryptic addresses, but this time there was an attachment, a video file with a subject line, "We're here." I didn't want to open it. I knew that whatever was in that video, it wasn't going to be good, but I also knew I had no choice. I couldn't ignore it, not now. With my heart racing, I clicked on the attachment and let the video load. The screen was pitch black at first, but then a faint light flickered on, revealing a dimly lit room. The camera was shaky, like it was being held by someone who couldn't keep still. The room was bare, except for a single chair in the center, facing the camera, and sitting in that chair was me. It was me, but not me. It was like looking into a mirror, but the reflection wasn't quite right. My double sat there, staring into the camera with this blank, empty expression. The longer I watched, the more I realized that something was off. His eyes, they weren't right. They were too dark, almost hollow, like the light had gone out of them. Then slowly, he started to smile. It wasn't a normal smile. It was this twisted, unnatural grin that stretched too far across his face. His head tilted to the side, like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. And then he started to speak. "Welcome," he said in a voice that was almost mine, but not quite. "It's time for you to join us." The video cut off abruptly, leaving me staring at the blank screen, my heart pounding in my chest. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. But before I could process it, my phone buzzed again. Another message, this time with just one line of text. Look outside. I didn't want to. Every instinct told me to stay put, to ignore it, to hide. But something compelled me to move, like I was being drawn toward the window by some unseen force. My legs felt like lead as I crossed the room and pulled back the curtain, just a sliver, enough to peek outside. There, standing in the street, right in front of my house, was the same car I'd seen before. The headlights were off, but the outline of the vehicle was unmistakable. And then, as I watched, the driver's side door opened slowly, almost deliberately. A figure stepped out, tall and shadowy, backlit by the faint glow of the street lamp. I couldn't make out the details of his face, but I knew it was him, the same man I'd seen before. He stood there for a moment, just staring at my house, before raising one hand and waving, like he knew I was watching. And that's when I realized he wasn't alone. There were others, standing just beyond the reach of the light, their silhouettes barely visible in the darkness. They were surrounding my house, closing in. I dropped the curtain and stumbled back, my heart racing, my mind screaming at me to run. But where could I go? They were everywhere, and they weren't going to stop until they had me. That's when I heard it, a soft, insistent tapping on my front door. 3 knocks, slow and deliberate, like they were giving me one last chance to answer. I didn't move. I couldn't move. I just stood there, frozen, as the knocking continued, growing louder, more forceful. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. Silence. I held my breath, waiting, listening. And then, from the other side of the door, I heard it. A voice, soft and familiar, calling my name. It was my voice. The sound of my own voice on the other side of the door was like a cold knife to the chest. It wasn't just a trick of the mind. It was unmistakably my voice, but twisted somehow, as if it had been filtered through something inhuman. I backed away slowly, my hands shaking, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the door. The silence that followed was suffocating, and the weight of the dread pressing down on me was almost unbearable. I couldn't stay in the house. I knew that much. Whatever was out there, it wasn't going to leave me alone. It wasn't going to stop until it got what it wanted. But where could I go? My mind raced, trying to think of someone, anyone, who could help. But the more I thought about it, the more hopeless it seemed. Who would believe me? The phone buzzed in my hand again, a harsh vibration that jolted me out of my thoughts. Another message, and this time it was a video call request. The same cryptic email address flashed across the screen, and my heart sank. I didn't want to answer, but the more I stared at the screen, the more I felt like I had to, like there was something waiting on the other end that I needed to see. With a shaky breath, I accepted the call. The screen went black for a moment, and then the image flickered to life. My own face stared back at me, but it wasn't like looking in a mirror. This version of me, this doppelganger, was standing outside in front of my house. Behind him, I could see the same group of shadowy figures standing in the street, just beyond the reach of the streetlight. They were motionless, like statues, but I could feel their eyes on me, even through the screen. The doppelganger tilted its head, that unnatural grin still stretched across its face. "Are you ready to join us?" it asked, its voice a perfect imitation of mine, but hollow, like it was being echoed through a cavern. I shook my head, more out of reflex than anything. I couldn't find my voice, couldn't form any words. The fear was paralyzing, a cold, suffocating presence that made it hard to breathe. The doppelganger leaned closer to the camera, its eyes narrowing, and for the first time, I noticed something truly horrifying. Its eyes weren't mine. They were dark, almost black, with no light, no reflection, just endless pits of emptiness. "You don't have a choice," it said, the grin widening even further, stretching the skin of its face into something grotesque. "We're already inside." The call ended abruptly, leaving me staring at the blank screen, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The words echoed in my head. "We're already inside." What did that mean? Were they in the house? Had they been watching me from within these walls the whole time? Panic surged through me, and I bolted for the front door. But as I reached for the handle, something stopped me cold. The air around me had changed. It was thicker, colder, like the temperature had dropped several degrees in an instant. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A shadow moved across the room, slithering along the walls like it was alive. It wasn't just a trick of the light. This shadow had substance, a form that shifted and twisted in ways that didn't make sense. It slid across the ceiling, then down the wall, pausing just above the doorframe. I backed away, my breath coming in ragged gasps as the shadow seemed to stretch out, forming into something almost human in shape, but not quite. It was like watching a figure made of smoke, constantly shifting, constantly changing, as if it couldn't quite hold itself together. And then, with a sudden, jarring movement, the shadow dropped to the floor and started crawling toward me. I didn't think. I just ran. I bolted up the stairs, my feet barely touching the ground as I sprinted for the only place I could think of. The attic. I don't know why I chose the attic. Maybe some primal instinct told me that it was the only place I could hide, the only place where I might be safe, even if just for a moment. The stairs creaked under my weight as I climbed, the sound echoing in the narrow space. The attic was dark, filled with old boxes and forgotten memories, but I didn't care. I pulled the ladder up behind me, shutting the hatch as quietly as I could, and backed into a corner, trying to make myself as small as possible. My phone buzzed again, but this time I ignored it. I couldn't bring myself to look at it, couldn't bear to see what new horrors might be waiting for me on that screen. Instead, I just sat there, curled up in the dark, listening. The house was silent, too silent, the kind of silence that presses down on you, making you aware of every little sound, every creak, every whisper of air. I could hear my own breathing, too loud in the confined space, and the pounding of my heart in my ears. And then faintly, I heard it. The sound of something moving through the house, slow, deliberate footsteps, coming up the stairs, stopping just outside the attic door. I held my breath, praying that whatever it was would leave, that it wouldn't find me. But the footsteps didn't retreat. They just stopped, right beneath the hatch, as if waiting. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. But then, something started tapping on the hatch. 3 knocks, slow and deliberate, just like at the front door. My blood ran cold. I knew what was coming, but I couldn't bring myself to move, to run. The tapping continued, and then I heard it, my voice, from right outside the door. "Let me in," it said, calm and almost soothing, as if trying to coax me out. "It's just me. I just want to talk." I clamped a hand over my mouth, trying to stifle the sobs that were threatening to break free. But the voice kept talking, more insistent now, more demanding. "Open the door," it said. "You know you can't hide forever. were already inside. The hatch rattled, as if someone or something was trying to force it open. I pressed myself further into the corner, my back against the cold, unforgiving wall, as the voice grew more frantic, more distorted. "We're here," it hissed, the words twisted into something almost unrecognizable. "You belong to us now." I couldn't take it anymore. The fear was too much, too overwhelming. I grabbed a box, some old, forgotten relic of a past life, and threw it against the hatch, hoping to make it stop, to make it go away. The hatch shook, but it didn't open. The voice went silent. For a moment, there was nothing, just the heavy, oppressive silence, and then the phone buzzed in my pocket again. My hands trembled as I pulled it out, the screen glowing faintly in the dark. Another video call request, but this time, the email address was different. It wasn't from the cryptic addresses that had been haunting me. It was from my own email. I didn't want to answer it. I knew I shouldn't. But my finger moved on its own, tapping the screen, accepting the call. The video flickered on, and I was greeted with an image that will haunt me for the rest of my life. It was me again, the doppelganger, standing in the attic, right in front of the hatch, staring down at the camera. But this time, there was no grin, no twisted smile. Its face was blank, emotionless, and its eyes, those dark, empty eyes, were locked onto the screen. Slowly, it raised one hand and placed it on the hatch, as if feeling for something. And then, it looked directly into the camera, into my eyes, and whispered, "We're inside." The call ended, and I was left staring at the black screen, my heart pounding in my chest, my mind racing. I didn't know what to do, where to go. They were inside. They were in the house, in the attic, and they were coming for me. And then, from the darkness, I heard it again, the sound of something moving, something crawling toward me. I didn't have time to react. The shadow that had followed me, that had been creeping through the house, was suddenly there, right in front of me. It surged forward, enveloping me in darkness, and I felt the cold, clammy grip of something inhuman closing around me. The last thing I remember before everything went black was the feeling of being pulled down into the darkness, as the voice, my voice, whispered one last time, "Welcome to the family." When I came to, I was no longer in the attic. The air was different, thick, heavy, with a musty, metallic scent that clung to the back of my throat. The floor beneath me was cold and rough, like concrete, but it wasn't my attic, or anywhere in my house for that matter. My head throbbed, and my vision was blurry as I tried to make sense of my surroundings. I was in a room, but not a room that I recognized. The walls were bare, stained with something dark that could have been rust or something far worse. The only light came from a single, naked bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting long, ominous shadows that danced with every flicker. The space was empty except for a large, black door at the far end of the room. It loomed there, closed and uninviting, as if daring me to approach. My heart pounded as I pushed myself up, every muscle in my body screaming in protest. I didn't know how I'd gotten here, but I knew I wasn't alone. There was a presence in the room, something I couldn't see but could feel deep in my bones. It was like the air was alive with malevolence, a low hum that vibrated through the floor and up into my chest. I staggered toward the door, the only option that made any sense. My footsteps echoed unnaturally in the confined space, the sound distorted as if the room itself was warping around me. The closer I got to the door, the stronger the feeling of dread became. It was like walking toward the edge of a cliff, knowing there was nothing but darkness waiting to swallow me whole. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob, cold to the touch and slick with something that made my skin crawl. But I had no choice. I needed to know what was on the other side, what had brought me here. With a deep breath, I turned the knob and pushed the door open. What I saw on the other side wasn't what I expected. It wasn't a continuation of the nightmarish room I'd been trapped in. It was my house. The same hallway, the same worn-out carpet, everything exactly as it had been before all of this started. But there was something wrong, something off that I couldn't quite place. The air was still thick, oppressive, and the shadows seemed to cling to the walls like living things, waiting. I stepped through the doorway, my heart racing. The door creaked shut behind me with a finality that sent a chill down my spine. As I moved further down the hallway, I noticed that the pictures on the walls, familiar photos of friends, family, moments from my life, were different. The faces were blurred, distorted, like someone had smeared them with a greasy hand. My breath caught in my throat when I reached the end of the hallway and found myself standing in front of my own bedroom door. It was slightly ajar, a faint light spilling out into the hallway, casting long, eerie shadows that twisted and writhed. I could hear something inside, a low murmur, like voices whispering just beneath the threshold of hearing. I pushed the door open slowly, every instinct screaming at me to run, but I was too far gone for that now. I had to see, had to know what was waiting for me. The room was exactly as I'd left it. Bed neatly made, curtains drawn, everything in its place. But standing in the middle of the room, facing away from me, was someone. No, not just someone. Me. The doppelganger was back, more real, more solid than ever before. It stood there, motionless, its back to me, dressed in my clothes, the same ones I'd been wearing before all of this started. The air was so thick with tension that it was hard to breathe, and I could feel the sweat trickling down my spine as I took a step closer. The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge me, but I knew it was aware of my presence. I could feel it. My hand trembled as I reached out, as if trying to touch it, to see if it was real. But before I could make contact, it spoke. "You're too late," it said in my voice, but the tone was wrong, flat, emotionless, like it was reciting lines in a play. "It's already done." I recoiled, my mind reeling, trying to make sense of what was happening. But then, the figure slowly turned around, and I was faced with my own reflection once again. The doppelganger's face was mine, but twisted. The grin stretched far too wide, the eyes nothing but dark, empty voids. "We're one now," it whispered, its voice echoing in the small room. "There's no escape." I stumbled back, terror gripping me like a vice, but there was nowhere to go. The room was closing in on me, the shadows pressing closer, suffocating me with their weight. I tried to scream, but no sound came out, my voice trapped in my throat. And then, as the darkness swallowed me whole, I understood. There was never any escape. The initiation, the calls, the videos, they weren't warnings. They were preparations. Preparations for the moment when the line between me and the doppelganger would blur and we would become one. I felt myself slipping away, the cold darkness creeping into my mind, into my soul. My thoughts became fragmented, disjointed, as the doppelganger's grin widened, consuming my vision, my reality. And in that final moment, as I was pulled into the void, I realized the truth. I'd become part of them, part of whatever twisted, malevolent force had been watching me, following me, waiting for the right moment to take me. The last thing I saw before everything went black was my own face, staring back at me with those hollow, empty eyes. And then there was nothing. I found a dark web service that sells untraceable identities. Now someone else is living my life. Alright, so let me start by saying that I'm not usually the kind of guy who gets into weird stuff. Like, I'm your average dude, mid-20s, work a boring 9-to-5 job, and spend most of my free time gaming or watching Netflix. But I've always had a bit of a curious side. You know, the kind that makes you wonder what's really out there on the internet beyond the cat videos and memes. So, a couple of months ago, I fell into this rabbit hole of deep web exploration videos on YouTube. You know, the ones where people claim they've found the creepiest stuff imaginable on the dark web. Most of it is probably staged, but it's fascinating in a messed up way. I started thinking, how much of this is real? How hard would it be to find these kinds of sites? I did a little research, nothing serious, just Googling and reading a few Reddit threads. Eventually, I figured out how to download Tor and access the dark web. At first, it was all just harmless curiosity. I was mostly browsing forums and sketchy marketplaces, just trying to get a sense of what's out there. The majority of it is actually pretty boring, just illegal stuff being sold and people pretending to be hackers. But one night, I found something that caught my attention. It was a post on a forum buried deep within a marketplace. The title was something like, "New Life, New Identity, Untraceable Service." The description was vague, just a few lines about how this service could provide you with a new identity, fully untraceable, with all the necessary documentation. It claimed that after using their service, you could start fresh as someone else, with no ties to your past life. Now, I wasn't planning on running away or anything. My life wasn't great, but it wasn't that bad either. But the idea intrigued me. Who wouldn't want to see what it's like to be someone else, even if just for a little while? So, out of sheer curiosity, I clicked the link. It took me to a plain black page with nothing but a single line of text. Welcome to your new life. Below, it was a form asking for basic details. Nothing too personal, just stuff like a name, date of birth, and the kind of identity I was looking for. There was also a checkbox that said, "I understand the risks." No payment info, no lengthy descriptions. Just fill in the form, click submit, and wait. At this point, I should have stopped. I should have realized that this wasn't just some harmless deep web curiosity, but I didn't. I figured it was just some scam, and worst case, I'd get a virus or something. So, I filled in the form with a fake name and date of birth, checked the box, and hit submit. Immediately, the screen went black, and a message popped up. Your new identity is being prepared. You will be contacted. I waited for a few minutes, but nothing happened. No email, no further instructions, nothing. I was honestly a bit disappointed. I figured it was just a dead link or some elaborate joke. I shut down my computer and went to bed, pretty much forgetting about the whole thing. But then, things started getting weird. It was subtle at first, just little things that made me do a double take. Like, I'd wake up in the morning and my phone would be in a different place than where I left it. Or my computer's homepage would suddenly be set to some random search engine I'd never heard of. I thought maybe I'd just forgotten or accidentally clicked on something. No big deal, right? But then, about a week later, I noticed something really strange. I was going through my emails, deleting junk as usual, when I saw an unread message in my inbox. The subject line was just my name, nothing else. I clicked on it, and the body of the email was empty, except for a single attachment labeled "Welcome." Against my better judgment, I opened the attachment. It was a photo of me. Not a photo I recognized or had ever taken, just a candid shot of me sitting at my desk, staring at my computer screen. The timestamp on the photo was from the previous night. I felt my stomach drop. I live alone. There's no one else who could have taken that photo, and I definitely didn't take it myself. My apartment has no cameras, and the blinds were closed. So, how the hell did someone get that picture? I tried to brush it off as some kind of prank, but it got under my skin. I started noticing more things out of place. My toothbrush would be wet when I hadn't used it, or I'd come home from work and find the TV turned on to a static channel. Little things that could easily be explained away, except that they kept happening. Then one night, I woke up at around 3 a.m. to the sound of footsteps in my apartment. Heavy, deliberate steps, like someone walking through my living room. My heart was pounding, and I could feel the sweat starting to drip down my forehead. I grabbed the baseball bat I keep under my bed and slowly crept out of my bedroom, every nerve in my body on high alert. But when I reached the living room, there was no one there. The door was locked, the windows were shut tight, and everything looked exactly how I'd left it. I even checked the closets and under the furniture, but found nothing. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next day at work, I couldn't focus. All I could think about was the photo and the footsteps, and the fact that someone or something was in my apartment, messing with my life. I left early and rushed home, half expecting to find my apartment trashed or something. But again, everything was normal. I wanted to believe I was just paranoid, that I was imagining things, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that whoever had taken that photo wasn't done with me yet. And then, just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, I found another email in my inbox. This time, the subject line read, "Are you ready for your new life?" I hesitated before opening it, my hands trembling as I clicked on the message. The email was just 2 sentences long. "Your new identity is ready. Someone else is already living your life." When I read those words, "Someone else is already living your life," I felt a cold wave of fear wash over me. I sat there staring at the screen, trying to make sense of it. What did they mean? Was this some sick joke? But deep down, I knew it wasn't. This was something much darker, something that had already started slipping out of my control. My first instinct was to call the police. But what was I supposed to tell them? That I'd been dabbling in the dark web, and now someone was stalking me. I could almost hear them laughing me off the phone. I knew I had to do something though, so I decided to go through my apartment with a fine-tooth comb, looking for anything that might explain what was happening. I started with the basics, checking for hidden cameras, bugs, or anything that seemed out of place. I didn't find anything obvious, but I did notice some strange details that I hadn't seen before. My dresser drawers were slightly out of alignment, like someone had rifled through them and tried to put everything back exactly the way they found it. My laptop had tiny scratches near the screws, as if it had been opened recently. And then there was my phone. Its battery life had been draining faster than usual. even though I hadn't been using it more than normal. I decided to do a factory reset on my phone and laptop, just to be safe. But that nagging feeling didn't go away. I could sense that something was off, like the air in my apartment was thicker than usual, like I wasn't alone even when I was. The next morning, I woke up to find that the factory reset on my phone hadn't worked. All my apps were still there, and my recent calls and texts hadn't been erased. It was as if nothing had happened. I tried again, but the result was the same. It was as if someone was blocking me from wiping my own phone. Then I noticed something even more disturbing. I had a missed call from a number I didn't recognize, and when I checked my voicemail, there was a message waiting for me. The voice on the other end was distorted, robotic, but clear enough to make out the words. "Stop trying to erase what's already been done. You asked for this. Now, it's time to live with it." I felt my blood run cold. Who was this? How did they get into my phone? And how were they watching me so closely? It was like they knew every move I made before I even made it. I spent the rest of the day on edge, constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at every small noise. I started to wonder if I was losing my mind, if maybe this was all just some kind of hallucination, but the fear was too real, too intense, for it to be all in my head. That night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep. I just sat in the dark, staring at my phone, waiting for something else to happen. And around midnight, it did. My phone buzzed with a notification, an email from an address I didn't recognize. I opened it, and there was a single sentence, plain as day. "Look outside." I didn't want to, but I couldn't help myself. I crept to the window and peered through the blinds, and what I saw made my heart nearly stop. There was a man standing on the sidewalk, right outside my building, staring up at my window. He was wearing a long black coat and a hat that cast a shadow over his face, but I could see his eyes, cold, emotionless, and locked directly on me. I dropped the blinds and stumbled back, my mind racing. Who was that? Was it the person who had been sending the emails, messing with my life? And if so, what did they want from me? I tried to convince myself that it was just a coincidence, that he was just some random guy who happened to be there. But when I peeked out again, he was still there, still staring, unmoving. It was like he was waiting for something, or someone. I stayed up all night, too afraid to sleep, too afraid to even move. And when morning finally came, I peeked out the window one last time. The man was gone, but the fear didn't leave with him. It only grew stronger. I decided to skip work that day. I called in sick and spent the entire day inside, paranoid that someone was watching me, waiting for me to make a move. I tried to distract myself with TV and video games, but I couldn't focus. My mind kept going back to the man outside, to the emails, to that single sentence that had started it all. Your new identity is ready. What did they mean by that? What new identity? Then, later that evening, I got another email. This time, it wasn't just a sentence. It was an invitation, a link to a live video feed. Against my better judgment, I clicked on it. The screen flickered, and then I saw it. My apartment. It was a live feed from inside my own home. The camera was positioned in the corner of the living room, aimed directly at the couch where I was sitting. My heart pounded as I realized what was happening. They were watching me, right now, in real time. They had access to my apartment, my life, everything. I scrambled to find the camera, tearing through the living room, throwing cushions aside, ripping down pictures from the walls, but I couldn't find anything. The feed stayed on, and then the chat window popped up on the side of the screen. A message appeared. Are you ready to see who's living your life now? The screen went black for a moment, and when it came back, I wasn't looking at my apartment anymore. I was looking at someone else, someone who looked just like me. He was sitting in an identical apartment, wearing clothes that looked just like mine, doing things that I would normally do. It was like looking into a mirror, except this wasn't a reflection. This was someone else, someone who had taken my place. I stared at the screen, my mind unable to process what I was seeing. This person, this thing, had my face, my voice, my mannerisms. It was me, but it wasn't me. It was living my life while I was stuck here, watching from the outside. I closed the laptop and threw it across the room, my breathing ragged. I was in a full-blown panic, unable to think straight. How was this even possible? Who had done this? And more importantly, why? I didn't know what to do, where to go, or who to turn to. All I knew was that my life wasn't mine anymore. Someone else was living it. I spent the next few days in a daze, too terrified to leave my apartment, too afraid to stay. Every noise, every creak of the floorboards sent my heart racing. My once familiar home had turned into a prison, a place where I was constantly watched, constantly hunted by something I couldn't understand. I tried calling my friends, but none of them picked up. It wasn't that they were ignoring me. It was more like their numbers didn't exist anymore. I'd dial their numbers, but instead of ringing, I'd get this strange, garbled static, like the line was dead. Texts wouldn't go through either. Every time I hit send, the messages would just disappear, as if they had never been typed at all. It was like my connections to the outside world were being severed, one by one, until I was completely isolated. Then came the strangest part, the part that made me question my own sanity. I started seeing myself around town. At first, it was just out of the corner of my eye. A quick glance of someone who looked exactly like me, walking down the street or getting into a car. I'd do a double take, but by the time I looked again, they'd be gone. But then it became more direct. One evening, I went out to get some fresh air, hoping a walk would clear my head. I hadn't been outside in days, too paranoid to leave, but I couldn't stand being cooped up any longer. As I walked through the dimly lit streets, I felt this nagging sensation that I was being followed. Every time I turned around, though, there was no one there. Eventually, I reached a small park near my apartment and sat down on a bench, trying to collect my thoughts. That's when I saw me. He was standing on the other side of the park, just watching me. He wore the same clothes I had on. His face was exactly like mine, down to the faint scar above my eyebrow. But his expression was different, colder, almost predatory. We locked eyes for a long moment, and a sickening realization washed over me. This was the person from the video, the one living my life. He was real, and he was here, right in front of me. I jumped up from the bench, ready to confront him, but as soon as I moved, he turned and started walking away. I broke into a run, desperate to catch him, to demand answers, but no matter how fast I ran, he always stayed just a few steps ahead, just out of reach. It was like trying to catch a shadow. Every time I thought I was close, he'd slip away, disappearing around a corner or into a dark alley. Eventually, I lost him completely, panting and drenched in sweat. I stood in the middle of the street, feeling more lost and alone than ever before. I didn't know where to go or what to do next. My own doppelganger was out there, living my life, and I was powerless to stop him. When I got back to my apartment, I found something that nearly made my heart stop. There, on the kitchen table, was a set of keys. My keys, the ones I always kept in my pocket, even when I went for a walk. But now, they were here, laid out neatly like someone had placed them there for me to find. Alongside the keys was a note, written in my own handwriting. I told you not to fight it. This is your last warning. I backed away from the table, my mind reeling. He, whoever or whatever he was, had been inside my apartment. He had my keys, my handwriting, my life, and he was warning me not to resist, not to try and take back what was mine. I felt a surge of anger rise up in me, mixed with a deep, gnawing fear. This wasn't just some prank or a bad dream. This was real, and it was happening to me. Someone, or something, had decided to take my life, and they were doing it so perfectly that no one would ever know the difference. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. My face, staring back at me, mocking me, daring me to do something about it. I kept expecting him to show up, to finally confront me and finish whatever twisted game he was playing. But the hours dragged on, and nothing happened. The next morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to leave, to get as far away from my apartment, from my life, as I could. Maybe if I disappeared, this thing, whatever it was, would lose interest in me, and I could start over somewhere else. I packed a bag with whatever essentials I could grab and headed for the door. But as soon as I opened it, I froze. Standing in the hallway, blocking my way out, was him. Me. He smiled, a cold, empty smile that made my blood run cold. "You can't leave," he said, his voice eerily calm. "This is your life now. You wanted this, remember?" I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. "What do you want from me?" I demanded, my voice trembling. His smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "I'm just here to live. You're the one who doesn't belong." Before I could respond, he lunged at me. I turned and ran, not knowing where I was going, just desperate to get away. I didn't stop until I was outside, gasping for air, my mind racing. I didn't know what to do, who to trust. All I knew was that I had to get away, far away, before it was too late. I jumped into my car and sped off, not caring where I was going, just wanting to put as much distance as possible between me and that thing that had taken my life. But as I drove, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, expecting to see him following me, his face twisted into that mocking grin. But the road behind me was empty. I kept driving for hours, until I was far out of the city, in the middle of nowhere. I found a cheap motel and checked in, using cash and a fake name. I didn't want to take any chances, but as I sat in that dingy motel room, staring at the peeling wallpaper and flickering TV, a horrible thought crept into my mind. What if he wasn't following me because he didn't need to? What if, no matter where I went, he would always be there, inside my life, living it, while I was left as nothing but a ghost, a shadow of who I used to be? The thought was too terrifying to bear. I had to do something, had to find a way to take back my life. But how? How do you fight something that wears your face, knows your every move, and seems to be one step ahead of you at every turn? I didn't have the answers, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep running. If I didn't find a way to stop him, I would lose everything, and maybe, just maybe, I already had. The next morning, I woke up in the motel, my mind heavy with dread. The thin curtains barely blocked the harsh sunlight, casting eerie, distorted shadows across the room. I sat up slowly, trying to shake off the fatigue, but it clung to me like a shroud. I hadn't slept much. Every creak of the old building had kept me on edge, waiting for that moment when the door would burst open and he would be standing there, grinning that cold, empty grin. But the night had passed without incident, and now I was left with a crushing sense of uncertainty. I couldn't keep hiding forever. Eventually, I'd run out of money, out of places to go. I needed a plan, something, anything, to regain control. I decided to head to the nearest library, hoping to use a public computer to do some research. I needed to figure out who or what this thing was and how to stop it. If I couldn't destroy it, maybe I could at least expose it. But deep down, I knew I was grasping at straws. This wasn't some ordinary identity theft or cyberstalking case. This was something much darker, much more insidious. The library was nearly empty when I arrived. I chose a computer tucked away in a corner, out of sight, and logged in. My fingers trembled as I typed, searching for anything related to doppelgangers, identity theft, and dark web horror stories. I clicked through pages and pages of forums, conspiracy theories, and urban legends, but nothing matched what I was experiencing. Nothing explained how someone could literally take over my life, wear my face, and erase me from existence. I was about to give up when I stumbled across a thread buried deep in a paranormal forum. The post was old, from years ago, and the title was simple: The Life Swap. My heart pounded as I read through the post. The author described a situation eerily similar to mine. Finding a service on the dark web that promised a new identity, only to discover that someone else had taken over their life. The details were almost identical. The strange emails, the doppelganger, the feeling of being watched, and the slow, methodical erasure of their existence. But what really caught my attention was the final part of the post. The author claimed they had discovered a way to reverse the process, to take back their life. The key, they said, was to find the source, the original site where the service had been offered. If you could find it and destroy it, everything would go back to the way it was. But there was a catch. The site was always moving, changing locations on the dark web, and it was nearly impossible to find once you'd used it. I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. It was a long shot, but it was the only lead I had. I needed to find that site, the one that had started this nightmare. Maybe, just maybe, I could reverse what had been done. But how was I supposed to find it? I had no idea where to even begin. The dark web wasn't exactly user-friendly, and even if I did find something, how could I be sure it was the right place? I felt the weight of despair settle on my shoulders, but I couldn't afford to give up now. I had to keep going. I decided to retrace my steps, going back to the deep web forums where I'd first found the service. I remembered the name of the marketplace, though it had probably moved by now, and I began my search. Hours passed as I sifted through site after site, most of them dead ends or traps set by hackers looking to exploit desperate users. But then, just as I was about to give up, I found something. It was a small, unassuming link buried in a thread about obscure services. The description was vague, just a few words in broken English, but it mentioned new identity and life change. My heart pounded as I clicked on it. The screen went black, and for a moment, I thought it was another dead end. But then, slowly, white text appeared on the screen. Welcome back. It was the same site, the same ominous message I'd seen before. My stomach churned, as I read the words. I'd found it, but now what? How was I supposed to destroy it? I noticed something different this time, though. There was a new link at the bottom of the page, labeled Terminate. My heart raced as I clicked on it, not sure what would happen next. A new screen appeared, with a simple command prompt and a single line of text. Are you sure you want to proceed? This action cannot be undone. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the keyboard. What if this didn't work? What if it made things worse? But I had no other choice. I had to try. With a deep breath, I typed yes and hit enter. The screen flickered, and for a moment, I thought nothing had happened. But then, the computer started to hum, and lines of code began to scroll rapidly across the screen. It was doing something, but I had no idea what. I watched intense silence, my pulse racing, as the code continued to run. Suddenly, the screen went black again, and then my reflection appeared. Only it wasn't my reflection. It was him, staring back at me through the monitor, that same cold, emotionless gaze. You really think it's that easy? He whispered, his voice echoing through the empty library. You can't erase me. I am you. The screen went blank, and the computer shut off with a soft click. The silence in the library was deafening, and I sat there, frozen, unable to move. Had I failed? Was it too late? I forced myself to leave the library, my mind numb with fear and confusion. As I walked back to the motel, everything felt off, like I was moving through a dream. The streets seemed quieter than usual, the people more distant, as if I was drifting further and further from reality. When I reached the motel, I stopped dead in my tracks. The door to my room was wide open, swinging gently in the breeze. I approached cautiously, every muscle in my body tensed, ready for anything. Inside, everything was exactly as I'd left it, except for one thing. There, on the bed, was my phone. The screen lit up with a single message. It was from my own number. You can't run from yourself. I picked up the phone, my hands shaking, and before I could even think, a notification popped up. An incoming call. The caller ID read, Home. Without thinking, I answered it. There was a moment of silence, and then I heard his voice. My voice, on the other end. Why are you fighting this? He asked, his tone almost pitying. You wanted this. You asked for a new life, and now you have it. Just let go. Who are you? I demanded, my voice trembling with anger and fear. What do you want from me? There was a pause, and then he answered, his voice cold and final. I'm the part of you that you've been trying to escape, but you can't escape yourself. This is your life now. The line went dead, and I dropped the phone, feeling a wave of nausea wash over me. I collapsed onto the bed, my mind spinning. What had I done? Had I really brought this on myself? Was this thing really a part of me? Or was it something else entirely? Something that had been waiting for the right moment to take over? I didn't have any answers. All I knew was that I was losing control, slipping further and further into a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. I stayed in that motel room for hours, unable to move, unable to think. And as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the room, I realized, with a sinking feeling, that I couldn't run from this. Wherever I went, he would follow. Because he wasn't just some stranger or some dark web entity. He was me. And no matter how far I ran, I couldn't escape myself. By the time the sun set, the shadows in the motel room seemed to stretch endlessly, swallowing up what little light was left. The walls felt like they were closing in, suffocating me as I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the phone that had fallen to the floor. His voice, my voice, still echoed in my head, a haunting reminder of the nightmare I was trapped in. I couldn't keep running. That much was clear now. No matter where I went, no matter how far I tried to escape, he would always be there, waiting, watching, and slowly taking over every part of my life. But if I couldn't run, what could I do? I had tried everything I could think of, and nothing had worked. But there had to be a way out. There had to be. The idea hit me like a bolt of lightning, so obvious and yet so terrifying that I couldn't believe I hadn't considered it before. If he was really a part of me, if he was the embodiment of everything I'd tried to escape, then maybe the only way to stop him was to confront him head on, to face him, to face myself, and to fight for my life. I grabbed my phone and dialed my own number, the number he had used to call me. My hand shook as the phone rang, each beep echoing in the silent room. After what felt like an eternity, he picked up. "Are you ready to accept it now?" he asked, his tone almost gentle, as if he were speaking to a child. "No," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I'm ready to end this." There was a long pause, and I could almost picture him on the other end, smiling that cold, empty smile. "Good," he finally said. "Then come home." The line went dead, and I was left staring at the phone, the weight of what I had to do settling heavily on my shoulders. There was no other option now. I had to go back to my apartment, back to where this all started. It was the last place I wanted to be, but it was the only place where this nightmare could end. The drive back was surreal, the city streets a blur of lights and shadows as I sped through the night. My mind raced with thoughts of what was waiting for me, of what I might have to face, but no matter how much I tried to prepare myself, I knew there was no way to predict what was coming. When I finally pulled up to my apartment building, the place looked as it always had, familiar, yet strangely foreign. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and headed inside. The hallway was eerily quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Each step echoed loudly in my ears as I approached my door. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob, half expecting it to be locked or barricaded, but it turned easily in my grasp. The door swung open, revealing my apartment bathed in darkness. I stepped inside, every nerve in my body on edge. The first thing I noticed was the smell. Faint, metallic, like old blood. My stomach churned, but I pushed forward, my eyes scanning the room for any sign of him. But the apartment was empty, eerily so, as if it hadn't been lived in for days. My furniture was in place, the blinds were drawn, and everything looked just as I had left it, except for one thing. In the middle of the living room, directly under the dim overhead light, was a mirror. It wasn't mine. I didn't own anything like it. It was tall, ornate, with a frame that looked like it was made of twisted, blackened metal. The glass was flawless, reflecting the room perfectly, but with a strange, almost unnatural clarity. I approached the mirror slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. As I drew closer, I saw my reflection, except it wasn't just a reflection. It was him. He stood there, mirroring my every move, but there was something off, something subtly wrong. His eyes were too dark, too hollow, and his smile too wide, too predatory. "I knew you'd come," he said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "You can't resist, can you? You're drawn to me, to the truth." "What truth?" I demanded, though my voice trembled. "What are you? Why are you doing this?" His smile widened, and he took a step closer to the glass. as if trying to step through. I'm everything you've tried to hide, he said. All the fears, the doubts, the regrets. You created me. You gave me life when you sought out a new identity, a way to escape your old one. But you can't escape yourself. No matter how far you run, I'll always be here, waiting. I felt a surge of anger and fear rise up in me, a burning need to fight back, to reclaim what was mine. I won't let you take my life, I said through gritted teeth. This ends here. He laughed, a hollow, mocking sound that sent chills down my spine. You're not strong enough to stop me, he said. But if you really think you can, then go ahead. Try. I didn't hesitate. I lunged forward, aiming to shatter the mirror, to break the connection between us. But as my hand reached the glass, something stopped me. It wasn't a physical barrier, but a force, a cold, invisible weight that pressed down on me, holding me back. I struggled, but it was like trying to move through molasses. Do you feel it? He whispered, his voice now right in my ear, though he hadn't moved. The truth. You can't destroy me because I am you. We're one and the same. I looked into his eyes, those dark, empty voids, and felt a deep, overwhelming despair wash over me. He was right. No matter how much I fought, no matter how much I tried to break free, he was a part of me, a part that I had let in, that I had nurtured with my own fears and desires. But even as the despair threatened to swallow me, something else stirred within, a spark of defiance, of hope. I wasn't ready to give up, not yet. There had to be a way to sever the connection, to take back my life. And then it hit me. If he was me, if he was truly a part of me, then maybe the only way to defeat him was to accept him, to acknowledge what I had done, to take responsibility for the darkness I had unleashed, and to reclaim it as my own. With that realization, I stopped struggling and looked him in the eye, really looked. You're right, I said, my voice steady. You are me, but that means you're under my control, not the other way around. For a moment, he hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. I seized the moment, focusing all my willpower, all my strength on that connection between us. I could feel it, a thin, taut thread binding us together, and I imagined myself pulling it, drawing him back into me, where he belonged. His smile faltered, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. No, he whispered, but it was too late. I was in control now. I pulled harder, and the mirror began to crack, thin lines spiderwebbing across the glass. His form wavered, distorted, as if he was being sucked back into the void. I'm not running anymore, I said, my voice growing stronger. I'm taking back my life. With one final effort, I yanked on the connection, and the mirror shattered. Glass exploded outward, and for a brief, blinding moment, I was engulfed in darkness. When the darkness cleared, I was alone in the room. The mirror was gone, nothing but a few shards of glass on the floor to mark where it had been. The air felt lighter. The oppressive weight that had hung over me finally lifted. I sank to my knees, overwhelmed by exhaustion, but also by a sense of relief. It was over. I had faced him, faced myself, and won. In the days that followed, I slowly began to rebuild my life. I changed my phone number, moved to a new apartment, and started over, this time without the need for a new identity. I'd learned the hard way that you can't escape who you are, but you can confront it, and you can change. I still have nightmares sometimes, where I see him, me, smiling that cold, empty smile. But I remind myself that I'm in control now, that I'm not running anymore. The darkness is a part of me, but it doesn't define me. And as long as I remember that, I know I can keep it at bay. The end. I bought a cursed domain name. Now my website is haunting me. Alright, so let me start by saying I've always been into weird stuff online. Like, I'm the guy who spends his nights scrolling through conspiracy theories, urban legends, and the occasional deep web rabbit hole. I'm not proud of it, but hey, it keeps things interesting, right? So, a couple of months ago, I got this brilliant idea. I wanted to create a website. Nothing fancy, just a little side project to showcase some of the creepy content I'd collected over the years. You know, stories, videos, random bits of lore from the dark corners of the internet. I figured it could be a fun way to connect with other like-minded people. And who knows, maybe it'd even blow up and make me a little extra cash. The only problem was, I couldn't find a good domain name. Everything I wanted was either taken or way too expensive. I was getting frustrated when I stumbled across this forum thread. It was one of those old, dusty forums that look like they haven't been updated since the early 2000s. You know the type. The thread was titled Cheap Domains, Rare Finds, and it was full of people selling off weird, obscure domain names for dirt cheap. Most of the names were garbage. Stuff like hauntedpancakes.com and ghostlytoenails.net. But then I saw it, nightmarefoyer.com. I don't know why, but something about that name just clicked with me. It was simple, but it had this eerie vibe that felt perfect for what I wanted to do. I checked the price, and my jaw nearly hit the floor. The seller was only asking for $10. Now, I'm not a superstitious guy, but even I thought that was a little too good to be true. So I clicked on the seller's profile to see if there was a catch. The profile was weird. No posts, no bio, no activity at all. The username was just a random string of numbers, and the only thing listed under previous transactions was a single comment from another user. Good luck. I hesitated for a second, but then my curiosity got the better of me. I figured, worst case scenario, I lose $10. I messaged the seller, and they responded almost immediately. They gave me a PayPal link. I sent the payment, and within minutes, I got an email confirming the domain transfer. Everything seemed legit. I set up the website the next day, uploaded a few stories and videos, and shared the link with a few friends. For the first couple of days, everything was fine. The site got a little traffic, mostly from people I knew, and I even got a couple of nice comments. I was feeling pretty good about the whole thing. But then, things started getting weird. It began with the analytics. I'd set up Google Analytics to track my site's traffic, and one night, I noticed a spike in visitors. We're talking hundreds of hits in just a few hours. I should have been excited, but something about it felt off. The traffic was coming from all over the world, but the session times were strange. Most visitors only stayed for a second, then bounced. No one was clicking on anything or leaving comments. It was like they were just there. At first, I chalked it up to bots, but then one of my friends messaged me, asking if I'd done something to the site. When I asked what he meant, he sent me a screenshot. It was my homepage, but something was wrong. The text was all garbled, like it had been run through a bad translator, and the images were distorted, stretched and warped into these grotesque, nightmarish versions of what I'd originally uploaded. But the weirdest part was the background. It had changed from the simple black I'd chosen to this dark, pulsing red, like the screen was bleeding. I told him I hadn't changed anything and quickly checked the site myself. When I pulled it up on my computer, everything looked fine. But when I tried it on my phone, I saw what he was talking about. The garbled text, the messed up images, the bleeding background. My heart started racing. I refreshed the page, but it didn't go away. I even tried clearing my cache and checking it in incognito mode, but nothing worked. The site was just wrong. I spent the next few hours tearing through the code, trying to figure out what was going on. I thought maybe I'd been hacked, or there was a bug in the theme I was using. But no matter what I did, I couldn't find the source of the problem. Everything looked normal in the back end. That's when I noticed the files. Buried deep in the site's directories, there was a folder I didn't recognize. It was called Hidden, and inside were a bunch of text files with names like whispers.txt and plead.txt. My stomach dropped. I hadn't put those there. I opened one of the files, whispers.txt, and my screen filled with lines of text, gibberish at first glance. But as I scrolled through, I noticed a pattern. Every few lines, there'd be a phrase in English, things like "it's coming" or "don't look behind you." The words made my skin crawl. I opened another file, plead.txt, and found more of the same. Disjointed sentences, random strings of characters, and those same eerie phrases, but this time they were more specific. "You're not safe, and get out now." By the time I reached the bottom of the file, my hands were shaking. I deleted the folder, or at least I thought I did. But when I refreshed the site, the files were back, along with a new one, "you.xt." At that point, I decided I needed help. I posted about the issue on a web development forum, asking if anyone had ever experienced anything like this. The responses ranged from, "It's probably a prank," to, "You need to contact a security expert ASAP." But one reply stood out to me. It was from a user named red_void, who simply wrote, "That domain was never yours to take." I stared at that comment for a long time. What the hell was that supposed to mean? Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was from my hosting provider, an automated message informing me that my site had been flagged for suspicious activity and would be temporarily suspended until I resolved the issue. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Maybe this was a good thing. Maybe if the site was taken down, whatever was happening would stop. But I was wrong. So very wrong. That was just the beginning. The next few days were eerily quiet. My website was down, and I thought that maybe, just maybe, that would be the end of it. I tried to push the whole thing out of my mind, telling myself that I'd just gotten a little too into my own head. But the weirdness wasn't done with me yet. Not by a long shot. It started with the emails. At first, I thought they were just spam, random creepy messages landing in my inbox like digital junk mail. But then I noticed something. The subject lines were all the same. "Are you there?" And the sender? They were all from different addresses, but they had a similar format. A string of numbers followed by the word void and some random domain like 74,684 void at something, com, or 3,939 void at another domain, net. I ignored the first few, figuring it was just a coincidence or some bizarre phishing attempt. But they kept coming, dozens of them, all day and night. Each one was just a single line of text, usually something like, "It's not safe," or "You shouldn't have done that." The messages were short, but they got under my skin, making me feel like someone, or something was watching me. The breaking point came when I received an email with a file attachment. The subject line read, "We see you," and the attachment was named proof.jpg. My heart was pounding as I clicked on it, half expecting some virus or another one of those distorted images I'd seen on my site. But it wasn't an image of my site. It was a picture of my house. The photo was taken from outside, just beyond the edge of my front yard, like someone had been standing there in the bushes. It was blurry, almost like it had been taken in a hurry, but there was no mistaking it. My house was the only one on my street, with that weird, half-dead tree in the front yard. I could see the windows, the front door, even my car parked in the driveway. My blood ran cold. Whoever or whatever had sent me that picture knew where I lived. I spent the rest of that night on high alert, jumping at every little noise. I checked the locks on all the doors and windows at least 10 times, but no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there, watching me. The logical part of my brain told me that it was probably just a prank, maybe even one of my friends messing with me. But deep down, I knew it was something else, something worse. The next day, I decided to go to the police. I took the photo and the emails with me, hoping they could trace the IP address or something. The officer I spoke to was polite, but didn't seem too concerned. He said they'd look into it, but he also mentioned that it was probably just a prank. Still, they agreed to send a patrol car by my house that night, just to be safe. That evening, I sat in my living room, staring at the clock and waiting for the patrol car to drive by. But as the hours ticked by, no one came. I tried calling the station, but I couldn't get through. The line just kept ringing. Then around midnight, the doorbell rang. I jumped up, my heart nearly leaping out of my chest. I wasn't expecting anyone, and after everything that had happened, I wasn't about to open the door without checking first. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept by the couch and crept over to the front window, carefully pulling back the curtain just enough to peek outside. There was no one there. The porch was empty, the yard was still, and the street beyond was dark and deserted. But the doorbell had definitely rung. I wasn't imagining it. I stood there for a minute, trying to convince myself to open the door and check, but something told me not to. Then I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of movement near the edge of my yard. I turned my head slowly, dread pooling in my stomach as I squinted into the darkness. For a moment, I thought I saw a figure, a tall, shadowy shape, standing just beyond the glow of the porch light. But when I blinked, it was gone. I backed away from the window, my heart racing, and hurried to the back of the house, where I locked myself in my bedroom. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there, on the edge of my bed, the bat clutched in my hands, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. The next morning, I found a note taped to my front door. It was a single sheet of paper, folded in half. The outside was blank, but when I opened it, I found a message written in neat, precise handwriting. "We warned you," it said. "This isn't your place." I stared at the note, my mind reeling. There was no signature, no indication of who had left it or when. But there was something about those words that sent a chill down my spine. That's when I knew I couldn't just ignore this anymore. Whatever I had gotten myself into, it wasn't going to go away on its own, and I had a feeling that the worst was yet to come. But what could I do? I couldn't just leave my house, and I wasn't about to start sleeping with one eye open for the rest of my life. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I went back online and started searching for answers. I combed through every forum, every dark web corner I could find, looking for anything that might explain what was happening. Most of what I found was the usual internet garbage, ghost stories, urban legends, and the occasional crazy conspiracy theory. But then, I came across something that made my blood run cold. It was an old blog post, buried deep in the archives of a site that hadn't been updated in years. The post was titled, "Cursed Domains, the Internet's Darkest Secret," and it was all about websites like mine, domains that were supposedly cursed or haunted, with a history of strange and often terrifying occurrences. According to the post, these domains had a way of latching on to anyone who owned them, like some kind of digital parasite. People who bought them often experienced bizarre technical issues, disturbing content appearing out of nowhere, and in some cases, physical manifestations of whatever was haunting the site. The blog even mentioned stories about people receiving threats, being stalked, and, worst of all, disappearing without a trace. As I read through the post, my mind raced. Could this really be what was happening to me? Was my website cursed? It sounded insane, but everything that had happened so far lined up with what the blog described. At the end of the post, there was a warning in bold letters. If you ever come across a domain for sale that seems too good to be true, do not buy it. It may cost you more than you bargained for. I felt sick to my stomach. I had ignored every red flag, every warning sign, and now I was paying the price. But the blog didn't just leave me hanging. It also offered a solution. Supposedly, the only way to break the curse was to transfer the domain to someone else. The catch? The new owner had to take it willingly. You couldn't just dump it on some unsuspecting person. I knew what I had to do, but I wasn't sure I could go through with it. I mean, how could I live with myself if I passed this nightmare on to someone else? But what choice did I have? If I didn't get rid of the domain, who knew what would happen next? That night, as I sat in the dark, staring at my computer screen, I made a decision. I would sell the domain, just like the person before me had done. But I wouldn't just dump it on some random person. I'd find someone who knew what they were getting into. Someone who wanted the thrill of owning a cursed website. It was the only way out, or at least that's what I told myself. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't be that simple. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I spent hours hunched over my computer, staring at the screen until my eyes burned. The house was too quiet, too still. Every little creak of the floorboards or rustle of the wind outside sent my nerves into overdrive. I felt like I was being watched, even though I couldn't see anyone or anything outside my windows. I kept going over the blog post in my mind, trying to convince myself that I was doing the right thing. If I could just find someone willing to take the domain, all of this would be over. The emails, the strange files, the feeling of being hunted, it would all stop. But as the hours ticked by, doubt began to creep in. What if it didn't work? What if the curse, or whatever it was, stayed with me even after I sold the domain? Or worse, what if it got stronger? I tried to push those thoughts aside as I started drafting a post for one of the more obscure forums I frequented, the kind where people traded stories about haunted objects, cursed relics, and other supernatural oddities. The forum was a haven for people who lived for this kind of thing, and I figured if anyone would be interested in buying a cursed domain, it would be someone from there. I kept the post simple. describing the domain as unique and a must-have for any collector of the strange and unusual. I didn't mention the curse outright, but I hinted at it, saying that the site came with a history of unexplained occurrences and was not for the faint of heart. I added a link to a screenshot of the distorted version of my homepage, thinking it would pique someone's curiosity. Then I hit post and waited. I expected it to take a few days, maybe even a week, to get a response, but within an hour I had my first message. It was from a user named Seeker192, and the message was short and to the point. "I'm interested. How much?" My heart skipped a beat. This was it. I could almost taste the relief, the sweet sensation of finally getting this nightmare off my back. I typed out a reply, offering to sell the domain for $50, a steal considering what I'd gone through. I figured the low price would make it clear that I was serious about getting rid of it. But Seeker192 responded almost immediately with a counteroffer, $10,000. My breath caught in my throat. $10,000 for a domain I was ready to give away just to get rid of it. It didn't make any sense, but I wasn't about to argue. I agreed to the price, trying to keep my excitement in check. It seemed too good to be true. I should have known better. We exchanged details, and I sent over the domain transfer link. As soon as the payment hit my account, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. It was done. The domain was gone, and with it, hopefully, all the madness that had come with it. For the first time in weeks, I slept soundly that night, but my peace didn't last long. The next morning, I woke up to a barrage of notifications on my phone. Missed calls, texts, and emails, all from unknown numbers and addresses. My heart sank as I unlocked my phone and started reading through the messages. They were from Seeker192. The first few were normal. Confirmation of the transfer, a simple thanks after the payment went through. But then the tone changed. The messages started getting frantic, desperate. He or she kept asking me what I'd done, what kind of game I was playing. They said the domain wasn't what they'd expected, that it was worse than anything they'd ever seen. By the time I reached the last few messages, I felt like I was going to throw up. The final one simply said, "You can't escape it. Neither can I." I tried calling the number they'd used, but it was disconnected. I sent a few emails, begging for more information, but they all bounced back. It was like Seeker192 had just vanished. My relief turned to dread. What had I done? I thought I was getting rid of a problem, but it felt more like I'd just spread it around, like I'd passed on some kind of infection. And now, I couldn't even warn them, whoever they were. That night, the nightmares started. They were vivid, almost too real, like I was living inside them instead of just dreaming. In the dreams, I was back on my website, but it wasn't like it used to be. The pages were dark, the text twisted into unreadable shapes, and the images, God, the images were worse than anything I'd seen before. Faces half melted, eyes hollowed out, mouths stretched into impossible, silent screams, and the whispers. I could hear them all around me, growing louder until they were the only thing I could hear. "We warned you," they said. "It's coming for you." I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding. I tried to shake off the dream, telling myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but the fear lingered. Every shadow in my room seemed to move. Every sound outside my window felt like a threat. Then, as I lay there, trying to calm myself down, I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was a faint, rhythmic tapping coming from somewhere inside the house. At first, I thought it was just the pipes or the wind, but as I listened, I realized it was too regular, too deliberate. It was like someone was knocking, but not at the door. No, this was coming from the walls. I forced myself to get up, clutching the bat I'd left by the bed. I followed the sound, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from. It led me to the basement door. Now, let me be clear. I don't go down to the basement. It's one of those old, creepy basements that's more like a dungeon with crumbling brick walls and a dirt floor. I keep it locked up for a reason, but the tapping was definitely coming from down there, growing louder with each step I took. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring at the door, the bat trembling in my hands. I knew I shouldn't open it, but I couldn't just stand there and do nothing. So, with every ounce of courage I could muster, I unlocked the door and slowly pushed it open. The basement was pitch black, the only light coming from the open door behind me. The air was thick, heavy, and smelled of damp earth. The tapping had stopped, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. I reached for the light switch, but it didn't work. Of course it didn't. I hesitated at the top of the stairs, peering into the darkness below. I wanted to just close the door and walk away, pretend none of this was happening. But something, curiosity, fear, or maybe something else, pushed me forward. I stepped onto the first stair, then the second, the wood creaking under my weight. With each step, the air grew colder until I could see my breath in front of me. I reached the bottom of the stairs, straining to see anything in the dark. Then I heard it, the whispering, the same as in my nightmares, but this time it was all around me. "We warned you," the voices hissed, so close I could almost feel their breath on my neck. "You can't escape." I froze, every muscle in my body tensed, ready to run. But before I could move, I felt something brush against my arm, cold, clammy, and very real. I bolted. I ran up the stairs, slammed the door behind me, and locked it, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. I backed away from the door, expecting it to burst open, but nothing happened. The whispering had stopped, and the house was silent again. But I knew I wasn't alone. I spent the rest of the night in the living room, the bat clutched in my hands, my eyes glued to the basement door. I didn't sleep. I just waited, my mind racing, trying to figure out what to do next. It was clear to me now. I hadn't just bought a cursed domain. I'd invited something into my life, something that wasn't going to let go so easily. And no matter how far I ran, no matter what I did, it was coming for me. I didn't leave the house the next day. I couldn't. Every time I thought about stepping outside, I felt this overwhelming sense of dread, like something was waiting for me out there. Instead, I spent the day pacing from room to room, trying to convince myself that everything was fine, that I hadn't just felt something cold and unnatural brush against me in the dark. But deep down, I knew that was a lie. By the time night fell, my nerves were shot. Every creak, every flicker of the lights had me on edge. I kept glancing at the basement door, half expecting it to swing open on its own, but it stayed shut, and the house remained eerily silent. That's when the power went out. 1 second, I was sitting in my living room, staring blankly at the TV, and the next, everything went dark. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint glow of the streetlights outside, it all vanished in an instant. The only sound was the pounding of my heart in my ears. I fumbled for my phone, using the screen to cast a weak light around the room. My first instinct was to check the fuse box, but that meant going down to the basement, and there was no way in hell I was going back down there. Instead, I grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen drawer and made my way to the front door. I figured if the whole neighborhood was out, it might just be a blackout, and I could deal with that. But as I approached the door, I hesitated. That same feeling of dread washed over me, the sense that something was waiting on the other side. But I had to know. I couldn't just sit in the dark and wait for whatever was happening to get worse. I unlocked the door and slowly pulled it open. The cool night air rushed in, but what I saw made my blood run cold. The street was empty, and every house around me was pitch black. No lights, no sounds, nothing. It was like the whole world had gone silent. Then, in the distance, I saw something. A figure, standing at the far end of the street. It was hard to make out any details in the darkness, but I could tell it was tall, almost unnaturally so, and it was just standing there, motionless, facing my house. I froze, gripping the door frame for support, my mind racing. Was this the thing that had been haunting me? The same thing that had followed me from the cursed domain? As I stared at the figure, it began to move. Slowly, deliberately, it started walking toward me, its steps echoing through the night. I wanted to slam the door shut, but I couldn't move. It was like I was rooted to the spot, unable to tear my eyes away from the figure as it drew closer and closer. When it was just a few houses away, I finally snapped out of it. I slammed the door and locked it, backing away as fast as I could. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped the flashlight. That's when the knocking started. It wasn't coming from the door this time. No, it was coming from the walls, the windows, the ceiling, everywhere at once, like dozens of hands were pounding against the house, trying to get in. The sound was deafening, a relentless, echoing barrage that made it impossible to think. I covered my ears and tried to block it out, but it just got louder, more insistent. I could feel the vibrations in the floorboards, the walls trembling under the force. It was like the house itself was being shaken apart. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the knocking stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse, thick and oppressive, like the air had been sucked out of the room. I stood there, heart racing, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But nothing did. No more knocking, no more movement outside. It was as if whatever had been out there had just given up. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? I just sat there in the dark, flashlight clutched in my hand, my eyes darting to every shadow, every corner of the room. But the house stayed silent, and when the sun finally rose, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. But even in the daylight, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong. The figure on the street, the knocking, it was all too real, too vivid to just be my imagination. I knew I needed help, but who could I turn to? The police would think I was crazy, and I didn't have any friends or family close enough to stay with. That's when I remembered the email I'd received from Red Void on that web development forum. The cryptic message about the domain not being mine to take had stuck with me, and now I realized I had no choice but to reach out to them. If anyone knew what was happening, it had to be them. I fired off a quick message explaining everything that had happened since I'd bought the domain. The strange files, the distorted images, the haunting at my house. I asked them if they knew what I could do to stop it, to make it all go away. I didn't expect a reply, at least not right away, but but to my surprise, they responded almost immediately. Their message was short, but it chilled me to the bone. You were warned. The domain belongs to them now. It's too late to run. The only thing you can do is accept it. My hands shook as I read and reread the message. Accept it? What the hell did that even mean? But before I could reply, another email came through. This one from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line simply read, "Final warning." I hesitated, then opened the email. Inside was a single sentence. "Look behind you." I dropped the phone and spun around, the flashlight swinging wildly as I scanned the room. There was nothing there, just empty space and shadows. But I could feel it, that same oppressive presence, like something was watching me from just beyond the edge of the light. I picked up the phone with trembling hands and deleted the email, trying to convince myself it was just another prank, another mind game. But deep down, I knew it was real. This was the final warning, just like the email said, and whatever was coming next, I wasn't sure I could handle it. That night, the power came back on, but the relief was short-lived. The lights flickered constantly, casting strange, shifting shadows that seemed to move on their own. And the whispers, they were back, just as before. But this time, they weren't in my head. They were coming from the walls, the floors, everywhere around me. I tried to block them out, but they grew louder, more insistent. They weren't just whispers anymore. They were voices, low and menacing, speaking in a language I didn't understand. But every now and then, I'd catch a word or phrase in English. Ours. Leave. Never. The fear was overwhelming, suffocating, and it took everything I had not to completely lose it. I knew I had to get out of the house, but every time I approached the door, the voices would grow louder, angrier, until I couldn't bear it anymore and had to back away. As the night wore on, the house grew colder and the voices more demanding. It felt like the walls were closing in on me, the air thickening with a sense of doom. I was trapped, and there was no way out. And then, just as I was about to give up, there was a knock at the door. It was soft, almost polite, but after everything I'd been through, it felt like a gunshot. I froze, staring at the door, my mind racing. Who would be knocking at this hour? And why did it feel so wrong? The knock came again, a little louder this time. I hesitated, then forced myself to stand up. My legs felt like jelly, but I somehow managed to make it to the door. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, then reached out and turned the handle. As the door swung open, the cold night air rushed in, chilling me to the bone. But there was no one there, just the empty street, silent and dark. Then I looked down. On the doorstep was a package, wrapped in plain brown paper and tied with a piece of twine. There was no name, no address, just the package, sitting there like it had been waiting for me. I bent down, hesitating before I picked it up. It was light, almost too light, like there was nothing inside. But as soon as I touched it, a wave of nausea washed over me, and the whispers in the house grew louder, more urgent. I knew I shouldn't open it. I knew it was a bad idea, but I couldn't help myself. I brought the package inside, closed the door, and set it on the kitchen table. My hands were trembling as I untied the twine and slowly peeled back the paper. Inside was a small wooden box, old and worn, with strange symbols carved into the surface. The box was locked, but there was no key. As I stared at the box, the whispers reached a fever pitch, filling my head with a cacophony of voices, each one competing to be heard. My vision blurred, and the room seemed to spin around me. I felt like I was being pulled into the box, like it was drawing me in with some unseen force. And then, just as quickly as it had started, everything went quiet. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. The whispers stopped, and the cold, oppressive presence I'd felt all night seemed to lift, leaving the air lighter, easier to breathe. But the box remained. I stared at it, feeling a mixture of fear and curiosity. Whatever was inside, I knew it wasn't good, but I also knew that I couldn't just leave it there. I had to open it. I had to know. With shaking hands, I reached out and touched the lid, and as I did, the lights went out again, plunging the house into darkness. And in the darkness, the voices returned, louder than ever before. The darkness swallowed me whole. I stood there, frozen, my fingers still resting on the box, as the oppressive silence pressed in from all sides. The voices, now louder and more insistent, filled the room, but it was like they were coming from inside my own head, echoing off the walls of my mind. "Open it," they whispered, a chorus of malevolent voices, all speaking in unison. "See what you've done." I knew I should have stopped, walked away, maybe even left the house for good. But I couldn't. Some force stronger than fear compelled me to lift the lid. The lock, which had seemed so secure just moments ago, now slid open effortlessly, as if the box had been waiting for this exact moment. Inside, there was nothing but a small, folded piece of paper. My heart pounded as I picked it up, my hands trembling so violently that I almost dropped it. The paper was old, yellowed with age, and as I unfolded it, I saw a single sentence scrawled across it in faded ink. "You cannot escape what you've invited in." As soon as I read the words, a wave of dizziness hit me, and I had to grip the edge of the table to keep from collapsing. The room spun, and for a moment, it felt like the floor was tilting beneath me. The voices grew louder, angrier, no longer whispering, but screaming, the words unintelligible, but filled with rage. And then, I saw it, the shadow. It moved across the wall, a dark, amorphous shape that shouldn't have been there. It didn't follow the light or the contours of the room. It was like it existed on a different plane, only barely touching the reality I knew. My breath caught in my throat as the shadow began to take shape, forming into something vaguely human but impossibly tall, its limbs too long, its head a mass of shifting darkness. The thing in the shadows, it was the same figure I'd seen on the street, the same presence I'd felt lurking just out of sight. But now, it was here, inside my house, inside my mind, and it was coming for me. I backed away, my heart hammering in my chest, but there was nowhere to go. The shadow filled the room, its tendrils stretching out, reaching for me. I could feel the cold, clammy sensation of those fingers brushing against my skin, just like before, but now there was no running away, no slamming a door to keep it out. "You invited us in," the voices hissed, their words now clear, unmistakable. "You took what was never yours. Now, it's time to pay the price." I tried to speak, to plead, but my throat was dry, my voice barely a whisper. "What do you want from me?" The shadow didn't answer with words, but I felt its intent, its malice, seep into my bones. It wanted everything, my mind, my body, my soul. It wanted to consume me, to make me part of whatever darkness it had come from. And as the shadow loomed over me, its form shifting and writhing, I realized that this had been the plan all along. The domain, the emails, the package, they were all part of some twisted game, a trap set by whatever malevolent force had attached itself to the website. I was never supposed to sell the domain. That had been the final step, the last act that sealed my fate. By passing it on, I had only made things worse, spreading the curse further, inviting the darkness deeper into my life. And now, there was no escape. The shadow closed in, its tendrils wrapping around me, squeezing the breath from my lungs. I struggled, fought to break free, but it was like trying to fight against a storm. The darkness seeped into my skin, my mind, filling me with a cold so deep it felt like it would freeze me from the inside out. And then, just as I thought I couldn't take any more, everything stopped. The shadow, the voices, the overwhelming sense of dread, it all vanished, leaving me standing alone in the dark, the box still open on the table, the piece of paper crumpled in my fist. The house was silent again, the lights flickering back on as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. This wasn't over. It would never be over. The shadow, the darkness, it had taken something from me, left a piece of itself behind. I could feel it inside me, a cold knot of fear and despair that would never go away. I had invited it in, and now it was part of me. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at the box, the paper, the walls that now seemed to press in on me from all sides. Eventually, I forced myself to move, to go through the motions of living. I closed the box, threw the paper away, and tried to convince myself that I could just forget, that I could go back to the way things were before. But deep down, I knew that was a lie. I sold the house a few weeks later. I couldn't stay there anymore, not with the memories of what had happened, of what I'd seen. But even after I moved, after I left everything behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, watching me from the shadows. The nightmares haven't stopped. Every night, I'm back in that basement, back in the darkness, with the shadow looming over me, whispering in my ear. It tells me that it's coming for me, that I can't run, can't hide. And the worst part, I know it's right. I've thought about telling someone, going to the police, seeing a doctor, anything to make this stop. But I know they wouldn't believe me. How could they? It sounds insane, even to me. So I'm writing this down, hoping that maybe, just maybe, someone out there will read it and understand. Maybe you'll believe me. Maybe you'll know how to stop it, how to make it go away. Or maybe, like me, you'll just have to learn to live with the darkness. Because once you've invited it in, it never really leaves. That's the end. There's nothing more to say. I can feel it now, the darkness, closing in again. Maybe this time, it won't let go. But if you've read this far, take my advice. Don't go looking for cursed things. Don't dig into the deep web or buy some weird domain just because it seems interesting. You never know what might be waiting on the other side, ready to reach out and pull you in. And if it does, well, just remember, you invited it in